Paper 162. At the Feast of Tabernacles. When Jesus started up to Jerusalem with the 10 apostles, he planned to go through Samaria, that being the shorter route. Accordingly, they passed down the eastern shore of the lake and, by way of Scythopolis, entered the borders of Samaria. Near nightfall, Jesus sent Philip and Matthew over to a village on the eastern slopes of Mount Gilboa to secure lodging for the company. It so happened that these villagers were greatly prejudiced against the Jews, even more so than the average Samaritans, and these feelings were heightened at this particular time, as so many were on their way to the Feast of Tabernacles. These people knew very little about Jesus, and they refused him lodging because he and his associates were Jews. When Matthew and Philip manifested indignation and informed these Samaritans that they were declining to entertain the Holy One of Israel, the infuriated villagers chased them out of the little town with sticks and stones. After Philip and Matthew had returned to their fellows and reported how they had been driven out of the village, James and John stepped up to Jesus and said, "Master, we pray you to give us permission to bid fire come down from heaven to devour these insolent and impenitent Samaritans." But when Jesus heard these words of vengeance, he turned upon the sons of Zebedee and severely rebuked them. "You know not what manner of attitude you manifest. Vengeance savors not of the outlook of the kingdom of heaven. Rather than dispute, let us journey over to the little village by the Jordan ford." Thus, because of sectarian prejudice, these Samaritans denied themselves the honor of showing hospitality to the Creator Son of a universe. Jesus and the 10 stopped for the night at the village near the Jordan ford. Early the next day they crossed the river and continued on to Jerusalem by way of the East Jordan Highway, arriving at Bethany late Wednesday evening. Thomas and Nathanael arrived on Friday, having been delayed by their conferences with Rhodan. Jesus and the 12 remained in the vicinity of Jerusalem until the end of the following month, October, about 4½ weeks. Jesus himself went into the city only a few times, and these brief visits were made during the days of the Feast of Tabernacles. He spent a considerable portion of October with Abner and his associates at Bethlehem. 1. The dangers of the visit to Jerusalem. Long before they fled from Galilee, the followers of Jesus had implored him to go to Jerusalem to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom, in order that his message might have the prestige of having been preached at the center of Jewish culture and learning. But now that he had actually come to Jerusalem to teach, they were afraid for his life. Knowing that the Sanhedrin had sought to bring Jesus to Jerusalem for trial, and recalling the Master's recently reiterated declarations that he must be subject to death, the apostles had been literally stunned by his sudden decision to attend the Feast of Tabernacles. To all their previous entreaties that he go to Jerusalem, he had replied, "The hour has not yet come." Now to their protests of fear he answered only, "But the hour has come." During the Feast of Tabernacles, Jesus went boldly into Jerusalem on several occasions and publicly taught in the temple. This he did in spite of the efforts of his apostles to dissuade him. Though they had long urged him to proclaim his message in Jerusalem, they now feared to see him enter the city at this time, knowing full well that the scribes and Pharisees were bent on bringing about his death. Jesus' bold appearance in Jerusalem more than ever confused his followers. Many of his disciples, and even Judas Iscariot, the apostle, had dared to think that Jesus had fled in haste into Phoenicia because he feared the Jewish leaders and Herod Antipas. They failed to comprehend the significance of the Master's movements. His presence in Jerusalem at the Feast of Tabernacles, even in opposition to the advice of his followers, sufficed forever to put an end to all whisperings about fear and cowardice. During the Feast of Tabernacles, thousands of believers from all parts of the Roman Empire saw Jesus, heard him teach, and many even journeyed out to Bethany to confer with him regarding the progress of the kingdom in their home districts. There were many reasons why Jesus was able publicly to preach in the temple courts throughout the days of the feast, and chief of these was the fear that had come over the officers of the Sanhedrin as a result of the secret division of sentiment in their own ranks. It was a fact that many of the members of the Sanhedrin either secretly believed in Jesus or else were decidedly averse to arresting him during the feast, when such large numbers of people were present in Jerusalem, many of whom either believed in him or were at least friendly to the spiritual movement which he sponsored. The efforts of Abner and his associates throughout Judea had also done much to consolidate sentiment favorable to the kingdom, so much so that the enemies of Jesus dared not be too outspoken in their opposition. This was one of the reasons why Jesus could publicly visit Jerusalem and live to go away. 1 or 2 months before this, he would certainly have been put to death. But the audacious boldness of Jesus in publicly appearing in Jerusalem overawed his enemies. They were not prepared for such a daring challenge. Several times during this month, the Sanhedrin made feeble attempts to place the Master under arrest, but nothing came of these efforts. His enemies were so taken aback by Jesus' unexpected public appearance in Jerusalem that they conjectured he must have been promised protection by the Roman authorities. Knowing that Philip, Herod Antipas's brother, was almost a follower of Jesus, the members of the Sanhedrin speculated that Philip had secured for Jesus promises of protection against his enemies. Jesus had departed from their jurisdiction before they awakened to the realization that they had been mistaken in the belief that his sudden and bold appearance in Jerusalem had been due to a secret understanding with the Roman officials. Only the 12 apostles had known that Jesus intended to attend the Feast of Tabernacles when they had departed from Magadan. The other followers of the Master were greatly astonished when he appeared in the temple courts and began publicly to teach, and the Jewish authorities were surprised beyond expression when it was reported that he was teaching in the temple. Although his disciples had not expected Jesus to attend the feast, the vast majority of the pilgrims from afar who had heard of him entertained the hope that they might see him at Jerusalem. And they were not disappointed, for on several occasions he taught in Solomon's porch and elsewhere in the temple courts. These teachings were really the official or formal announcement of the divinity of Jesus to the Jewish people and to the whole world. The multitudes who listened to the Master's teachings were divided in their opinions. Some said he was a good man, some a prophet, some that he was truly the Messiah. Others said he was a mischievous meddler, and that he was leading the people astray with his strange doctrines. His enemies hesitated to denounce him openly for fear of his friendly believers, while his friends feared to acknowledge him openly for fear of the Jewish leaders, knowing that the Sanhedrin was determined to put him to death. But even his enemies marveled at his teaching, knowing that he had not been instructed in the schools of the rabbis. Every time Jesus went to Jerusalem, his apostles were filled with terror. They were the more afraid as from day to day they listened to his increasingly bold pronouncements regarding the nature of his mission on earth. They were unaccustomed to hearing Jesus make such positive claims and such amazing assertions, even when preaching among his friends. 2. The First Temple Talk. The first afternoon that Jesus taught in the temple, a considerable company sat listening to his words depicting the liberty of the new gospel and the joy of those who believe the good news, when a curious listener interrupted him to ask, "Teacher, how is it you can quote the Scriptures and teach the people so fluently when I am told that you are untaught in the learning of the rabbis?" Jesus replied, "No man has taught me the truths which I declare to you, and this teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. If any man really desires to do my Father's will, he shall certainly know about my teaching, whether it be God's or whether I speak for myself. He who speaks for himself seeks his own glory, but when I declare the words of the Father, I thereby seek the glory of him who sent me. But before you try to enter into the new light, should you not rather follow the light you already have? Moses gave you the law. Yet how many of you honestly seek to fulfill its demands? Moses in this law enjoins you, saying, 'You shall not kill.' Notwithstanding this command, some of you seek to kill the Son of Man." When the crowd heard these words, they fell to wrangling among themselves. Some said he was mad, some that he had a devil. Others said this was indeed the prophet of Galilee, whom the scribes and Pharisees had long sought to kill. Some said the religious authorities were afraid to molest him. Others thought that they laid not hands upon him because they had become believers in him. After considerable debate, one of the crowd stepped forward and asked Jesus, "Why do the rulers seek to kill you?" And he replied, "The rulers seek to kill me because they resent my teaching about the good news of the kingdom, a gospel that sets men free from the burdensome traditions of a formal religion of ceremonies which these teachers are determined to uphold at any cost. They circumcise in accordance with the law on the Sabbath day, but they would kill me because I once, on the Sabbath day, set free a man held in the bondage of affliction. They follow after me on the Sabbath to spy on me, but would kill me because on another occasion I chose to make a grievously stricken man completely whole on the Sabbath day. They seek to kill me because they well know that if you honestly believe and dare to accept my teaching, their system of traditional religion will be overthrown, forever destroyed. Thus will they be deprived of authority over that to which they have devoted their lives, since they steadfastly refuse to accept this new and more glorious gospel of the kingdom of God. And now do I appeal to every one of you. Judge not according to outward appearances, but rather judge by the true spirit of these teachings. Judge righteously." Then said another inquirer, "Yes, teacher, we do look for the Messiah, but when he comes, we know that his appearance will be in mystery. We know whence you are. You have been among your brethren from the beginning. The deliverer will come in power to restore the throne of David's kingdom. Do you really claim to be the Messiah?" And Jesus replied, "You claim to know me, and to know whence I am. I wish your claims were true, for indeed then would you find abundant life in that knowledge. But I declare that I have not come to you for myself. I have been sent by the Father, and he who sent me is true and faithful. By refusing to hear me, you are refusing to receive him who sends me. You, if you will receive this gospel, shall come to know him who sent me. I know the Father, for I have come from the Father to declare and reveal him to you." The agents of the scribes wanted to lay hands upon him, but they feared the multitude, for many believed in him. Jesus' work, since his baptism, had become well known to all Jewry, and as many of these people recounted these things, they said among themselves, "Even though this teacher is from Galilee, and even though he does not meet all of our expectations of the Messiah, we wonder if the deliverer, when he does come, will really do anything more wonderful than this Jesus of Nazareth has already done." When the Pharisees and their agents heard the people talking this way, they took counsel with their leaders and decided that something should be done forthwith to put a stop to these public appearances of Jesus in the temple courts. The leaders of the Jews in general were disposed to avoid a clash with Jesus, believing that the Roman authorities had promised him immunity. They could not otherwise account for his boldness in coming at this time to Jerusalem. But the officers of the Sanhedrin did not wholly believe this rumor. They reasoned that the Roman rulers would not do such a thing secretly and without the knowledge of the highest governing body of the Jewish nation. Accordingly, Eber, the proper officer of the Sanhedrin, with 2 assistants, was dispatched to arrest Jesus. As Eber made his way toward Jesus, the Master said, "Fear not to approach me. Draw near while you listen to my teaching. I know you have been sent to apprehend me, but you should understand that nothing will befall the Son of Man until his hour comes. You are not arrayed against me. You come only to do the bidding of your masters, and even these rulers of the Jews verily think they are doing God's service when they secretly seek my destruction. I bear none of you ill will. The Father loves you, and therefore do I long for your deliverance from the bondage of prejudice and the darkness of tradition. I offer you the liberty of life and the joy of salvation. I proclaim the new and living way, the deliverance from evil, and the breaking of the bondage of sin. I have come that you might have life, and have it eternally. You seek to be rid of me and my disquieting teachings. If you could only realize that I am to be with you only a little while. In just a short time I go to him who sent me into this world. And then will many of you diligently seek me, but you shall not discover my presence, for where I am about to go you cannot come. But all who truly seek to find me shall sometime attain the life that leads to my Father's presence. Some of the scoffers said among themselves, Where will this man go that we cannot find him? Will he go to live among the Greeks? Will he destroy himself? What can he mean when he declares that soon he will depart from us, and that we cannot go where he goes? Eber and his assistants refused to arrest Jesus. They returned to their meeting place without him. When, therefore, the chief priests and the Pharisees upbraided Eber and his assistants because they had not brought Jesus with them, Eber only replied, We feared to arrest him in the midst of the multitude, because many believe in him. Besides, we never heard a man speak like this man. There is something out of the ordinary about this teacher. You would all do well to go over to hear him. And when the chief rulers heard these words, they were astonished and spoke tauntingly to Eber. Are you also led astray? Are you about to believe in this deceiver? Have you heard that any of our learned men or any of the rulers have believed in him? Have any of the scribes or Pharisees been deceived by his clever teachings? How does it come that you are influenced by the behavior of this ignorant multitude, who know not the law or the prophets? Do you not know that such untaught people are accursed? And then answered Eber, Even so, my masters, but this man speaks to the multitude words of mercy and hope. He cheers the downhearted, and his words were comforting even to our souls. What can there be wrong in these teachings, even though he may not be the Messiah of the Scriptures? And even then does not our law require fairness? Do we condemn a man before we hear him? And the chief of the Sanhedrin was wroth with Eber, and turning upon him said, Have you gone mad? Are you by any chance also from Galilee? Search the Scriptures, and you will discover that out of Galilee arises no prophet, much less the Messiah. The Sanhedrin disbanded in confusion, and Jesus withdrew to Bethany for the night. 3. The woman taken in adultery. It was during this visit to Jerusalem that Jesus dealt with a certain woman of evil repute, who was brought into his presence by her accusers and his enemies. The distorted record you have of this episode would suggest that this woman had been brought before Jesus by the scribes and Pharisees, and that Jesus so dealt with them as to indicate that these religious leaders of the Jews might themselves have been guilty of immorality. Jesus well knew that while these scribes and Pharisees were spiritually blind and intellectually prejudiced by their loyalty to tradition, they were to be numbered among the most thoroughly moral men of that day and generation. What really happened was this. Early the third morning of the feast, as Jesus approached the temple, he was met by a group of the hired agents of the Sanhedrin who were dragging a woman along with them. As they came near, the spokesman said, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now the law of Moses commands that we should stone such a woman. What do you say should be done with her? It was the plan of Jesus' enemies, if he upheld the law of Moses, requiring that the self-confessed transgressor be stoned, to involve him in difficulty with the Roman rulers, who had denied the Jews the right to inflict the death penalty without the approval of a Roman tribunal. If he forbade stoning the woman, they would accuse him before the Sanhedrin of setting himself up above Moses and the Jewish law. If he remained silent, they would accuse him of cowardice. But the master so managed the situation that the whole plot fell to pieces of its own sordid weight. This woman, once comely, was the wife of an inferior citizen of Nazareth, a man who had been a troublemaker for Jesus throughout his youthful days. The man, having married this woman, did most shamefully force her to earn their living by making commerce of her body. He had come up to the feast at Jerusalem that his wife might thus prostitute her physical charms for financial gain. He had entered into a bargain with the hirelings of the Jewish rulers thus to betray his own wife in her commercialized vice. And so they came with the woman and her companion in transgression for the purpose of ensnaring Jesus into making some statement which could be used against him in case of his arrest. Jesus, looking over the crowd, saw her husband standing behind the others. He knew what sort of man he was, and perceived that he was a party to the despicable transaction. Jesus first walked around to near where this degenerate husband stood, and wrote upon the sand a few words, which caused him to depart in haste. Then he came back before the woman, and wrote again upon the ground for the benefit of her would-be accusers. And when they read his words, they too went away one by one. And when the master had written in the sand the third time, the woman's companion in evil took his departure, so that when the master raised himself up from this writing, he beheld the woman standing alone before him. Jesus said, "Woman, where are your accusers? Did no man remain to stone you?" And the woman, lifting up her eyes, answered, "No man, Lord." And then said Jesus, "I know about you. Neither do I condemn you. Go your way in peace." And this woman, Hildana, forsook her wicked husband and joined herself to the disciples of the kingdom. 4. The Feast of Tabernacles. The presence of people from all of the known world, from Spain to India, made the Feast of Tabernacles an ideal occasion for Jesus, for the first time publicly to proclaim his full gospel in Jerusalem. At this feast the people lived much in the open air, in leafy booths. It was the feast of the harvest ingathering, and coming as it did in the cool of the autumn months, it was more generally attended by the Jews of the world than was the Passover at the end of the winter or Pentecost at the beginning of summer. The apostles at last beheld their Master making the bold announcement of his mission on earth before all the world, as it were. This was the feast of feasts, since any sacrifice not made at the other festivals could be made at this time. This was the occasion of the reception of the temple offerings. It was a combination of vacation pleasures with the solemn rites of religious worship. Here was a time of racial rejoicing, mingled with sacrifices, Levitical chants, and the solemn blasts of the silvery trumpets of the priests. At night the impressive spectacle of the temple and its pilgrim throngs was brilliantly illuminated by the great candelabras, which burned brightly in the court of the women, as well as by the glare of scores of torches standing about the temple courts. The entire city was gaily decorated, except the Roman castle of Antonia, which looked down in grim contrast upon this festive and worshipful scene. And how the Jews did hate this ever-present reminder of the Roman yoke. 70 bullocks were sacrificed during the feast, the symbol of the 70 nations of heathendom. The ceremony of the outpouring of the water symbolized the outpouring of the divine Spirit. This ceremony of the water followed the sunrise procession of the priests and Levites. The worshippers passed down the steps leading from the court of Israel to the court of the women, while successive blasts were blown upon the silvery trumpets. And then the faithful marched on toward the beautiful gate, which opened upon the court of the Gentiles. Here they turned about to face westward, to repeat their chants, and to continue their march for the symbolic water. On the last day of the feast, almost 450 priests, with a corresponding number of Levites, officiated. At daybreak the pilgrims assembled from all parts of the city, each carrying in the right hand a sheaf of myrtle, willow, and palm branches, while in the left hand each one carried a branch of the paradise apple, the citron, or the forbidden fruit. These pilgrims divided into 3 groups for this early morning ceremony. One band remained at the temple to attend the morning sacrifices. Another group marched down below Jerusalem to near Mazah to cut the willow branches for the adornment of the sacrificial altar, while the third group formed a procession to march from the temple behind the water priest, who, to the sound of the silvery trumpets, bore the golden pitcher, which was to contain the symbolic water, out through Ophel to near Siloam, where was located the fountain gate. After the golden pitcher had been filled at the pool of Siloam, the procession marched back to the temple, entering by way of the water gate, and going directly to the court of the priests, where the priest bearing the water pitcher was joined by the priest bearing the wine for the drink offering. These 2 priests then repaired to the silver funnels, leading to the base of the altar, and poured the contents of the pitchers therein. The execution of this rite of pouring the wine and the water was the signal for the assembled pilgrims to begin the chanting of the Psalms from 113 to 118 inclusive, in alternation with the Levites. And as they repeated these lines, they would wave their sheaves at the altar. Then followed the sacrifices for the day, associated with the repeating of the psalm for the day. The psalm for the last day of the feast being the 82nd, beginning with the 5th verse. 5. Sermon on the Light of the World. On the evening of the last day of the feast, when the scene was brilliantly illuminated by the lights of the candelabras and the torches, Jesus stood up in the midst of the assembled throng and said, "I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life." Presuming to place me on trial, and assuming to sit as my judges, you declare that, if I bear witness of myself, my witness cannot be true. But never can the creature sit in judgment on the Creator. Even if I do bear witness about myself, my witness is everlastingly true, for I know whence I came, who I am, and whither I go. You who would kill the Son of Man know not whence I came, who I am, or whither I go. You judge only by the appearances of the flesh. You do not perceive the realities of the Spirit. I judge no man, not even my arch-enemy. But if I should choose to judge, my judgment would be true and righteous, for I would judge not alone, but in association with my Father, who sent me into the world, and who is the source of all true judgment. You even allow that the witness of 2 reliable persons may be accepted. Well, then, I bear witness of these truths. So also does my Father in heaven. And when I told you this yesterday, in your darkness you asked me, "Where is your Father?" Truly, you know neither me nor my Father. For if you had known me, you would also have known the Father. I have already told you that I am going away, and that you will seek me and not find me. For where I am going you cannot come. You who would reject this light are from beneath. I am from above. You who prefer to sit in darkness are of this world. I am not of this world, and I live in the eternal light of the Father of lights. You all have had abundant opportunity to learn who I am, but you shall have still other evidence, confirming the identity of the Son of Man. I am the light of life, and everyone who deliberately and with understanding rejects this saving light shall die in his sins. Much I have to tell you, but you are unable to receive my words. However, he who sent me is true and faithful. My Father loves even his erring children, and all that my Father has spoken I also proclaim to the world. When the Son of Man is lifted up, then shall you all know that I am he, and that I have done nothing of myself, but only as the Father has taught me. I speak these words to you and to your children. And he who sent me is even now with me. He has not left me alone, for I do always that which is pleasing in his sight." As Jesus thus taught the pilgrims in the temple courts, many believed, and no man dared to lay hands upon him. 6. Discourse on the Water of Life. On the last day, the great day of the feast, as the procession from the pool of Siloam passed through the temple courts, and just after the water and the wine had been poured down upon the altar by the priests, Jesus, standing among the pilgrims, said, "If any man thirst, let him come to me and drink. From the Father above I bring to this world the water of life. He who believes me shall be filled with the Spirit which this water represents, for even the Scriptures have said, 'Out of him shall flow rivers of living waters.' When the Son of Man has finished his work on earth, there shall be poured out upon all flesh the living Spirit of truth. Those who receive this Spirit shall never know spiritual thirst." Jesus did not interrupt the service to speak these words. He addressed the worshippers immediately after the chanting of the Hallel, the responsive reading of the Psalms, accompanied by waving of the branches before the altar. Just here was a pause while the sacrifices were being prepared, and it was at this time that the pilgrims heard the fascinating voice of the Master declare that he was the giver of living water to every spirit-thirsting soul. At the conclusion of this early morning service, Jesus continued to teach the multitude, saying, "Have you not read in the Scripture, 'Behold, as the waters are poured out upon the dry ground, and spread over the parched soil, so will I give the Spirit of holiness to be poured out upon your children for a blessing, even to your children's children'? Why will you thirst for the ministry of the Spirit, while you seek to water your souls with the traditions of men, poured from the broken pitchers of ceremonial service? That which you see going on about this temple is the way in which your fathers sought to symbolize the bestowal of the divine Spirit upon the children of faith, and you have done well to perpetuate these symbols even down to this day. But now has come to this generation the revelation of the Father of spirits through the bestowal of his Son, and all of this will certainly be followed by the bestowal of the Spirit of the Father and the Son upon the children of men. To everyone who has faith shall this bestowal of the Spirit become the true teacher of the way which leads to life everlasting, to the true waters of life in the kingdom of heaven on earth, and in the Father's paradise over there." And Jesus continued to answer the questions of both the multitude and the Pharisees. Some thought he was a prophet. Some believed him to be the Messiah. Others said he could not be the Christ, seeing that he came from Galilee, and that the Messiah must restore David's throne. Still they dared not arrest him. 7. The Discourse on Spiritual Freedom. On the afternoon of the last day of the feast, and after the apostles had failed in their efforts to persuade him to flee from Jerusalem, Jesus again went into the temple to teach. Finding a large company of believers assembled in Solomon's porch, he spoke to them, saying, "If my words abide in you, and you are minded to do the will of my Father, then are you truly my disciples. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. I know how you will answer me. We are the children of Abraham, and we are in bondage to none. How then shall we be made free? Even so, I do not speak of outward subjection to another's rule. I refer to the liberties of the soul. Verily, verily I say to you, everyone who commits sin is the bondservant of sin. And you know that the bondservant is not likely to abide forever in the master's house. You also know that the Son does remain in his Father's house. If, therefore, the Son shall make you free, shall make you sons, you shall be free indeed. I know that you are Abraham's seed, yet your leaders seek to kill me because my word has not been allowed to have its transforming influence in their hearts. Their souls are sealed by prejudice and blinded by the pride of revenge. I declare to you the truth which the Eternal Father shows me, while these deluded teachers seek to do the things which they have learned only from their temporal fathers. And when you reply that Abraham is your father, then do I tell you that if you were the children of Abraham, you would do the works of Abraham. Some of you believe my teaching, but others seek to destroy me because I have told you the truth which I received from God. But Abraham did not so treat the truth of God. I perceive that some among you are determined to do the works of the evil one. If God were your father, you would know me and love the truth which I reveal. Will you not see that I come forth from the Father, that I am sent by God, that I am not doing this work of myself? Why do you not understand my words? Is it because you have chosen to become the children of evil? If you are the children of darkness, you will hardly walk in the light of the truth which I reveal. The children of evil follow only in the ways of their father, who was a deceiver, and stood not for the truth, because there came to be no truth in him. But now comes the Son of Man, speaking and living the truth, and many of you refuse to believe. Which of you convicts me of sin? If I then proclaim and live the truth shown me by the Father, why do you not believe? He who is of God hears gladly the words of God. For this cause many of you hear not my words, because you are not of God. Your teachers have even presumed to say that I do my works by the power of the prince of devils. One nearby has just said that I have a devil, that I am a child of the devil. But all of you who deal honestly with your own souls know full well that I am not a devil. You know that I honor the Father even while you would dishonor me. I seek not my own glory, only the glory of my paradise Father. And I do not judge you, for there is one who judges for me. Verily, verily I say to you who believe the gospel, that if a man will keep this word of truth alive in his heart, he shall never taste death. And now, just at my side, a scribe says, "This statement proves that I have a devil, seeing that Abraham is dead, also the prophets." And he asks, "Are you so much greater than Abraham and the prophets, that you dare to stand here and say that whoso keeps your word shall not taste death? Who do you claim to be, that you dare to utter such blasphemies? And I say to all such that, if I glorify myself, my glory is as nothing. But it is the Father who shall glorify me, even the same Father whom you call God. But you have failed to know this your God and my Father, and I have come to bring you together, to show you how to become truly the sons of God. Though you know not the Father, I truly know him. Even Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and by faith he saw it and was glad. When the unbelieving Jews and the agents of the Sanhedrin, who had gathered about by this time, heard these words, they raised a tumult, shouting, "You are not 50 years of age, and yet you talk about seeing Abraham. You are a child of the devil." Jesus was unable to continue the discourse. He only said as he departed, "Verily, verily I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." Many of the unbelievers rushed forth for stones to cast at him, and the agents of the Sanhedrin sought to place him under arrest. But the Master quickly made his way through the temple corridors and escaped to a secret meeting place near Bethany, where Martha, Mary, and Lazarus awaited him. 8. The visit with Martha and Mary. It had been arranged that Jesus should lodge with Lazarus and his sisters at a friend's house, while the apostles were scattered here and there in small groups, these precautions being taken because the Jewish authorities were again becoming bold with their plans to arrest him. For years it had been the custom for these three to drop everything and listen to Jesus' teaching whenever he chanced to visit them. With the loss of their parents, Martha had assumed the responsibilities of the home life, And so on this occasion, while Lazarus and Mary sat at Jesus' feet, drinking in his refreshing teaching, Martha made ready to serve the evening meal. It should be explained that Martha was unnecessarily distracted by numerous needless tasks, and that she was cumbered by many trivial cares. That was her disposition. As Martha busied herself with all these supposed duties, she was perturbed because Mary did nothing to help. Therefore she went to Jesus and said, "Master, do you not care that my sister has left me alone to do all of the serving? Will you not bid her to come and help me?" Jesus answered, "Martha, Martha, why are you always anxious about so many things and troubled by so many trifles? Only one thing is really worthwhile, and since Mary has chosen this good and needful part, I shall not take it away from her. But when will both of you learn to live as I have taught you, both serving in cooperation and both refreshing your souls in unison? Can you not learn that there is a time for everything, that the lesser matters of life should give way before the greater things of the heavenly kingdom?" 9. At Bethlehem with Abner. Throughout the week that followed the Feast of Tabernacles, scores of believers foregathered at Bethany and received instruction from the 12 apostles. The Sanhedrin made no effort to molest these gatherings, since Jesus was not present. He was throughout this time working with Abner and his associates in Bethlehem. The day following the close of the feast, Jesus had departed for Bethany, and he did not again teach in the temple during this visit to Jerusalem. At this time, Abner was making his headquarters at Bethlehem, and from that center many workers had been sent to the cities of Judea and southern Samaria, and even to Alexandria. Within a few days of his arrival, Jesus and Abner completed the arrangements for the consolidation of the work of the two groups of apostles. Throughout his visit to the Feast of Tabernacles, Jesus had divided his time about equally between Bethany and Bethlehem. At Bethany, he spent considerable time with his apostles. At Bethlehem, he gave much instruction to Abner and the other former apostles of John. And it was this intimate contact that finally led them to believe in him. These former apostles of John the Baptist were influenced by the courage he displayed in his public teaching in Jerusalem, as well as by the sympathetic understanding they experienced in his private teaching at Bethlehem. These influences finally and fully won over each of Abner's associates to a wholehearted acceptance of the kingdom, and all that such a step implied. Before leaving Bethlehem for the last time, the Master made arrangements for them all to join him in the united effort which was to precede the ending of his earth career in the flesh. It was agreed that Abner and his associates were to join Jesus and the 12 in the near future at Magadan Park. In accordance with this understanding, early in November, Abner and his 11 fellows cast their lot with Jesus and the 12, and labored with them as one organization right on down to the crucifixion. In the latter part of October, Jesus and the 12 withdrew from the immediate vicinity of Jerusalem. On Sunday, October 30, Jesus and his associates left the city of Ephraim, where he had been resting in seclusion for a few days, and, going by the West Jordan Highway directly to Magadan Park, arrived late on the afternoon of Wednesday, November 2. The apostles were greatly relieved to have the Master back on friendly soil. No more did they urge him to go up to Jerusalem to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom.
Paper 163. Ordination of the 70 at Magadan. A few days after the return of Jesus and the 12 to Magadan from Jerusalem, Abner and a group of some 50 disciples arrived from Bethlehem. At this time there were also assembled at Magadan camp the evangelistic corps, the women's corps, and about 150 other true and tried disciples from all parts of Palestine. After devoting a few days to visiting and the reorganization of the camp, Jesus and the 12 began a course of intensive training for this special group of believers. And from this well-trained and experienced aggregation of disciples, the Master subsequently chose the 70 teachers and sent them forth to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom. This regular instruction began on Friday, November 4, and continued until Sabbath, November 19. Jesus gave a talk to this company each morning. Peter taught methods of public preaching. Nathanael instructed them in the art of teaching. Thomas explained how to answer questions, while Matthew directed the organization of their group finances. The other apostles also participated in this training in accordance with their special experience and natural talents. 1. Ordination of the 70. The 70 were ordained by Jesus on Sabbath afternoon, November 19, at the Magadan camp, and Abner was placed at the head of these gospel preachers and teachers. This corps of 70 consisted of Abner and 10 of the former apostles of John, 51 of the earlier evangelists, and 8 other disciples who had distinguished themselves in the service of the kingdom. About 2 o'clock on this Sabbath afternoon, between showers of rain, a company of believers, augmented by the arrival of David and the majority of his messenger corps, and numbering over 400, assembled on the shore of the Lake of Galilee to witness the ordination of the 70. Before Jesus laid his hands upon the heads of the 70 to set them apart as gospel messengers, addressing them, he said, "The harvest is indeed plenteous, but the laborers are few. Therefore, I exhort all of you to pray that the Lord of the harvest will send still other laborers into his harvest. I am about to set you apart as messengers of the kingdom. I am about to send you to Jew and Gentile as lambs among wolves. As you go your ways, 2 and 2, I instruct you to carry neither purse nor extra clothing, for you go forth on this first mission for only a short season. Salute no man by the way, attend only to your work. Whenever you go to stay at a home, first say, 'Peace be to this household.' If those who love peace live therein, you shall abide there. If not, then shall you depart. And having selected this home, remain there for your stay in that city, eating and drinking whatever is set before you. And you do this because the laborer is worthy of his sustenance. Move not from house to house because a better lodging may be offered. Remember, as you go forth proclaiming peace on earth and goodwill among men, you must contend with bitter and self-deceived enemies. Therefore be as wise as serpents while you are also as harmless as doves. And everywhere you go, preach, saying, 'The kingdom of heaven is at hand,' and minister to all who may be sick in either mind or body. Freely you have received of the good things of the kingdom, freely give. If the people of any city receive you, they shall find an abundant entrance into the Father's kingdom. But if the people of any city refuse to receive this gospel, still shall you proclaim your message as you depart from that unbelieving community, saying, even as you leave, to those who reject your teaching, notwithstanding you reject the truth, it remains that the kingdom of God has come near you. He who hears you hears me, and he who hears me hears him who sent me. He who rejects your gospel message rejects me, and he who rejects me rejects him who sent me." When Jesus had thus spoken to the 70, he began with Abner and, as they knelt in a circle about him, laid his hands upon the head of every man. Early the next morning, Abner sent the 70 messengers into all the cities of Galilee, Samaria, and Judea, and these 35 couples went forth preaching and teaching for about 6 weeks, all of them returning to the new camp near Pella in Perea on Friday, December 30. 2. The rich young man and others. Over 50 disciples who sought ordination and appointment to membership in the 70 were rejected by the committee appointed by Jesus to select these candidates. This committee consisted of Andrew, Abner, and the acting head of the evangelistic corps. In all cases where this committee of 3 were not unanimous in agreement, they brought the candidate to Jesus, and while the Master never rejected a single person who craved ordination as a gospel messenger, there were more than a dozen who, when they had talked with Jesus, no more desired to become gospel messengers. One earnest disciple came to Jesus saying, "Master, I would be one of your new apostles, but my father is very old and near death. Could I be permitted to return home to bury him?" To this man Jesus said, "My son, the foxes have holes, and the birds of heaven have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. You are a faithful disciple, and you can remain such while you return home to minister to your loved ones, but not so with my gospel messengers. They have forsaken all to follow me and proclaim the kingdom. If you would be an ordained teacher, you must let others bury the dead, while you go forth to publish the good news." And this man went away in great disappointment. Another disciple came to the Master and said, "I would become an ordained messenger, but I would like to go to my home for a short while to comfort my family." And Jesus replied, "If you would be ordained, you must be willing to forsake all. The gospel messengers cannot have divided affections. No man, having put his hand to the plow, if he turns back, is worthy to become a messenger of the kingdom." Then Andrew brought to Jesus a certain rich young man who was a devout believer and who desired to receive ordination. This young man, Matadormus, was a member of the Jerusalem Sanhedrin. He had heard Jesus teach and had been subsequently instructed in the gospel of the kingdom by Peter and the other apostles. Jesus talked with Matadormus concerning the requirements of ordination and requested that he defer decision until after he had thought more fully about the matter. Early the next morning, as Jesus was going for a walk, this young man accosted him and said, "Master, I would know from you the assurances of eternal life. Seeing that I have observed all the commandments from my youth, I would like to know what more I must do to gain eternal life." In answer to this question, Jesus said, "If you keep all the commandments, do not commit adultery, do not kill, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honor your parents, you do well. But salvation is the reward of faith, not merely of works. Do you believe this gospel of the kingdom?" And Matadormus answered, "Yes, Master, I do believe everything you and your apostles have taught me." And Jesus said, "Then are you indeed my disciple and a child of the kingdom." Then said the young man, "But, Master, I am not content to be your disciple. I would be one of your new messengers." When Jesus heard this, he looked down upon him with a great love and said, "I will have you to be one of my messengers, if you are willing to pay the price, if you will supply the one thing which you lack." Matadormus replied, "Master, I will do anything if I may be allowed to follow you." Jesus, kissing the kneeling young man on the forehead, said, "If you would be my messenger, go and sell all that you have, and when you have bestowed the proceeds upon the poor or upon your brethren, come and follow me, and you shall have treasure in the kingdom of heaven." When Matadormus heard this, his countenance fell. He arose and went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. This wealthy young Pharisee had been raised to believe that wealth was the token of God's favor. Jesus knew that he was not free from the love of himself and his riches. The Master wanted to deliver him from the love of wealth, not necessarily from the wealth. While the disciples of Jesus did not part with all their worldly goods, the apostles and the 70 did. Matadormus desired to be one of the 70 new messengers, and that was the reason for Jesus requiring him to part with all of his temporal possessions. Almost every human being has some one thing which is held on to as a pet evil, and which the entrance into the kingdom of heaven requires as a part of the price of admission. If Matadormus had parted with his wealth, it probably would have been put right back into his hands for administration as treasurer of the 70. For later on, after the establishment of the church at Jerusalem, he did obey the Master's injunction, although it was then too late to enjoy membership in the 70, and he became the treasurer of the Jerusalem church, of which James, the Lord's brother in the flesh, was the head. Thus always it was and forever will be. Men must arrive at their own decisions. There is a certain range of the freedom of choice which mortals may exercise. The forces of the spiritual world will not coerce man. They allow him to go the way of his own choosing. Jesus foresaw that Matadormus, with his riches, could not possibly become an ordained associate of men who had forsaken all for the gospel. At the same time, he saw that without his riches, he would become the ultimate leader of all of them. But like Jesus' own brethren, he never became great in the kingdom because he deprived himself of that intimate and personal association with the Master, which might have been his experience had he been willing to do at this time the very thing which Jesus asked, and which, several years subsequently, he actually did. Riches have nothing directly to do with entrance into the kingdom of heaven, but the love of wealth does. The spiritual loyalties of the kingdom are incompatible with servility to materialistic mammon. Man may not share his supreme loyalty to a spiritual ideal with a material devotion. Jesus never taught that it was wrong to have wealth. He required only the 12 and the 70 to dedicate all of their worldly possessions to the common cause. Even then, he provided for the profitable liquidation of their property, as in the case of the Apostle Matthew. Jesus many times advised his well-to-do disciples as he taught the rich man of Rome. The Master regarded the wise investment of excess earnings as a legitimate form of insurance against future and unavoidable adversity. When the apostolic treasury was overflowing, Judas put funds on deposit to be used subsequently when they might suffer greatly from a diminution of income. This Judas did after consultation with Andrew. Jesus never personally had anything to do with the apostolic finances except in the disbursement of alms. But there was one economic abuse which he many times condemned, and that was the unfair exploitation of the weak, unlearned, and less fortunate of men by their strong, keen, and more intelligent fellows. Jesus declared that such inhuman treatment of men, women, and children was incompatible with the ideals of the brotherhood of the kingdom of heaven. 3. The discussion about wealth. By the time Jesus had finished talking with Matadormus, Peter and a number of the apostles had gathered about him, and as the rich young man was departing, Jesus turned around to face the apostles and said, "You see how difficult it is for those who have riches to enter fully into the kingdom of God. Spiritual worship cannot be shared with material devotions. No man can serve two masters. You have a saying that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for the heathen to inherit eternal life. And I declare that it is as easy for this camel to go through the needle's eye as for these self-satisfied rich ones to enter the kingdom of heaven." When Peter and the apostles heard these words, they were astonished exceedingly, so much so that Peter said, "Who then, Lord, can be saved? Shall all who have riches be kept out of the kingdom?" And Jesus replied, "No, Peter, but all who put their trust in riches shall hardly enter into the spiritual life that leads to eternal progress. But even then, much which is impossible to man is not beyond the reach of the Father in heaven. Rather should we recognize that with God all things are possible." As they went off by themselves, Jesus was grieved that Matadormus did not remain with them, for he greatly loved him. And when they had walked down by the lake, they sat there beside the water, and Peter, speaking for the 12, who were all present by this time, said, "We are troubled by your words to the rich young man. Shall we require those who would follow you to give up all their worldly goods?" And Jesus said, "No, Peter, only those who would become apostles, and who desire to live with me as you do and as one family. But the Father requires that the affections of his children be pure and undivided. Whatever thing or person comes between you and the love of the truths of the kingdom must be surrendered. If one's wealth does not invade the precincts of the soul, it is of no consequence in the spiritual life of those who would enter the kingdom." And then said Peter, "But Master, we have left everything to follow you. What then shall we have?" And Jesus spoke to all of the 12, "Verily, verily, I say to you, there is no man who has left wealth, home, wife, brethren, parents, or children for my sake and for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, who shall not receive manifold more in this world, perhaps with some persecutions, and in the world to come, eternal life. But many who are first shall be last, while the last shall often be first. The Father deals with his creatures in accordance with their needs and in obedience to his just laws of merciful and loving consideration for the welfare of a universe. The kingdom of heaven is like a householder who was a large employer of men, and who went out early in the morning to hire laborers to work in his vineyard. When he had agreed with the laborers to pay them a denarius a day, he sent them into the vineyard. Then he went out about 9 o'clock, and seeing others standing in the marketplace idle, he said to them, "Go you also to work in my vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will pay you." And they went at once to work. Again he went out about 12 and about 3 and did likewise. And going to the marketplace about 5 in the afternoon, he found still others standing idle, and he inquired of them, "Why do you stand here idle all the day?" And the men answered, "Because nobody has hired us." Then said the householder, "Go you also to work in my vineyard, and whatever is right I will pay you." When evening came, this owner of the vineyard said to his steward, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last hired and ending with the first." When those who were hired about 5 o'clock came, they received a denarius each, and so it was with each of the other laborers. When the men who were hired at the beginning of the day saw how the later comers were paid, they expected to receive more than the amount agreed upon. But like the others, every man received only a denarius. And when each had received his pay, they complained to the householder, saying, "These men who were hired last worked only 1 hour, and yet you have paid them the same as us who have borne the burden of the day in the scorching sun." Then answered the householder, "My friends, I do you no wrong. Did not each of you agree to work for a denarius a day? Take now that which is yours and go your way, for it is my desire to give to those who came last as much as I have given to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with my own? Or do you begrudge my generosity because I desire to be good and to show mercy?" 4. Farewell to the 70. It was a stirring time about the Magadan camp, the day the 70 went forth on their first mission. Early that morning, in his last talk with the 70, Jesus placed emphasis on the following. 1. The gospel of the kingdom must be proclaimed to all the world, to Gentile as well as to Jew. 2. While ministering to the sick, refrain from teaching the expectation of miracles. 3. Proclaim a spiritual brotherhood of the sons of God, not an outward kingdom of worldly power and material glory. 4. Avoid loss of time through overmuch social visiting and other trivialities which might detract from wholehearted devotion to preaching the gospel. 5. If the first house to be selected for a headquarters proves to be a worthy home, abide there throughout the sojourn in that city. 6. Make clear to all faithful believers that the time for an open break with the religious leaders of the Jews at Jerusalem has now come. 7. Teach that man's whole duty is summed up in this one commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your mind and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. This they were to teach as man's whole duty, in place of the 613 rules of living expounded by the Pharisees. When Jesus had talked thus to the 70 in the presence of all the apostles and disciples, Simon Peter took them off by themselves and preached to them their ordination sermon, which was an elaboration of the Master's charge given at the time he laid his hands upon them and set them apart as messengers of the kingdom. Peter exhorted the 70 to cherish in their experience the following virtues. 1. Consecrated devotion. To pray always for more laborers to be sent forth into the gospel harvest. He explained that, when one so prays, he will the more likely say, "Here am I, send me." He admonished them to neglect not their daily worship. 2. True courage. He warned them that they would encounter hostility and be certain to meet with persecution. Peter told them their mission was no undertaking for cowards and advised those who were afraid to step out before they started, but none withdrew. 3. Faith and trust. They must go forth on this short mission wholly unprovided for. They must trust the Father for food and shelter and all other things needful. 4. Zeal and initiative. They must be possessed with zeal and intelligent enthusiasm. They must attend strictly to their master's business. Oriental salutation was a lengthy and elaborate ceremony. Therefore had they been instructed to salute no man by the way, which was a common method of exhorting one to go about his business without the waste of time. It had nothing to do with a matter of friendly greeting. 5. Kindness and courtesy. The Master had instructed them to avoid unnecessary waste of time in social ceremonies, but he enjoined courtesy toward all with whom they should come in contact. They were to show every kindness to those who might entertain them in their homes. They were strictly warned against leaving a modest home to be entertained in a more comfortable or influential one. 6. Ministry to the sick. The 70 were charged by Peter to search out the sick in mind and body, and to do everything in their power to bring about the alleviation or cure of their maladies. And when they had been thus charged and instructed, they started out, 2 and 2, on their mission in Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. Although the Jews had a peculiar regard for the number 70, sometimes considering the nations of heathendom as being 70 in number, and although these 70 messengers were to go with the gospel to all peoples, still as far as we can discern, it was only coincidental that this group happened to number just 70. Certain it was that Jesus would have accepted no less than half a dozen others, but they were unwilling to pay the price of forsaking wealth and families. 5. Moving the camp to Pella. Jesus and the 12 now prepared to establish their last headquarters in Perea, near Pella, where the Master was baptized in the Jordan. The last 10 days of November were spent in council at Magadan, and on Tuesday, December 6, the entire company of almost 300 started out at daybreak with all their effects to lodge that night near Pella by the river. This was the same site, by the spring, that John the Baptist had occupied with his camp several years before. After the breaking up of the Magadan camp, David Zebedee returned to Bethsaida and began immediately to curtail the messenger service. The kingdom was taking on a new phase. Daily, pilgrims arrived from all parts of Palestine and even from remote regions of the Roman Empire. Believers occasionally came from Mesopotamia and from the lands east of the Tigris. Accordingly, on Sunday, December 18, David, with the help of his messenger corps, loaded onto the pack animals the camp equipage, then stored in his father's house, with which he had formerly conducted the camp of Bethsaida by the lake. Bidding farewell to Bethsaida for the time being, he proceeded down the lake shore and along the Jordan to a point about 1/2 mile north of the apostolic camp, and in less than a week he was prepared to offer hospitality to almost 1,500 pilgrim visitors. The apostolic camp could accommodate about 500. This was the rainy season in Palestine, and these accommodations were required to take care of the ever-increasing number of inquirers, mostly earnest, who came into Perea to see Jesus and to hear his teaching. David did all this on his own initiative, though he had taken counsel with Philip and Matthew at Magadan. He employed the larger part of his former messenger corps as his helpers in conducting this camp. He now used less than 20 men on regular messenger duty. Near the end of December and before the return of the 70, almost 800 visitors were gathered about the Master, and they found lodging in David's camp. 6. The return of the 70. On Friday, December 30, while Jesus was away in the nearby hills with Peter, James, and John, the 70 messengers were arriving by couples, accompanied by numerous believers at the Pella headquarters. All 70 were assembled at the teaching site about 5 o'clock when Jesus returned to the camp. The evening meal was delayed for more than an hour while these enthusiasts for the gospel of the kingdom related their experiences. David's messengers had brought much of this news to the apostles during previous weeks, but it was truly inspiring to hear these newly ordained teachers of the gospel personally tell how their message had been received by hungry Jews and Gentiles. At last, Jesus was able to see men going out to spread the good news without his personal presence. The Master now knew that he could leave this world without seriously hindering the progress of the kingdom. When the 70 related how even the devils were subject to them, they referred to the wonderful cures they had wrought in the cases of victims of nervous disorders. Nevertheless, there had been a few cases of real spirit possession relieved by these ministers, and referring to these, Jesus said, "It is not strange that these disobedient minor spirits should be subject to you, seeing that I beheld Satan falling as lightning from heaven. But rejoice not so much over this, for I declare to you that, as soon as I return to my Father, we will send forth our spirits into the very minds of men, so that no more can these few lost spirits enter the minds of unfortunate mortals. I rejoice with you that you have power with men, but be not lifted up because of this experience, but the rather rejoice that your names are written on the rolls of heaven, and that you are thus to go forward in an endless career of spiritual conquest." And it was at this time, just before partaking of the evening meal, that Jesus experienced one of those rare moments of emotional ecstasy which his followers had occasionally witnessed. He said, "I thank you, my Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that, while this wonderful gospel was hidden from the wise and self-righteous, the Spirit has revealed these spiritual glories to these children of the kingdom. Yes, my Father, it must have been pleasing in your sight to do this, and I rejoice to know that the good news will spread to all the world, even after I shall have returned to you and the work which you have given me to perform. I am mightily moved as I realize you are about to deliver all authority into my hands, that only you really know who I am, and that only I really know you, and those to whom I have revealed you. And when I have finished this revelation to my brethren in the flesh, I will continue the revelation to your creatures on high." When Jesus had thus spoken to the Father, he turned aside to speak to his apostles and ministers. "Blessed are the eyes which see and the ears which hear these things. Let me say to you that many prophets and many of the great men of the past ages have desired to behold what you now see, but it was not granted them. And many generations of the children of light yet to come will, when they hear of these things, envy you who have heard and seen them." Then, speaking to all the disciples, he said, "You have heard how many cities and villages have received the good news of the kingdom, and how my ministers and teachers have been received by both the Jew and the Gentile. And blessed indeed are these communities which have elected to believe the gospel of the kingdom. But woe upon the light-rejecting inhabitants of Chorazin, Bethsaida Julius, and Capernaum, the cities which did not well receive these messengers. I declare that, if the mighty works done in these places had been done in Tyre and Sidon, the people of these so-called heathen cities would have long since repented in sackcloth and ashes. It shall indeed be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon in the day of judgment." The next day, being the Sabbath, Jesus went apart with the 70 and said to them, "I did indeed rejoice with you when you came back bearing the good tidings of the reception of the gospel of the kingdom by so many people scattered throughout Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. But why were you so surprisingly elated? Did you not expect that your message would manifest power in its delivery? Did you go forth with so little faith in this gospel that you come back in surprise at its effectiveness? And now, while I would not quench your spirit of rejoicing, I would sternly warn you against the subtleties of pride, spiritual pride. If you could understand the downfall of Lucifer, the iniquitous one, you would solemnly shun all forms of spiritual pride. You have entered upon this great work of teaching mortal man that he is a son of God. I have shown you the way. Go forth to do your duty, and be not weary in well-doing. To you and to all who shall follow in your steps down through the ages, let me say, I always stand near, and my invitation call is, and ever shall be, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am true and loyal, and you shall find spiritual rest for your souls." And they found the Master's words to be true when they put his promises to the test. And since that day countless thousands also have tested and proved the surety of these same promises. 7. Preparation for the last mission. The next few days were busy times in the Pella camp. Preparations for the Perean mission were being completed. Jesus and his associates were about to enter upon their last mission, the 3 months' tour of all Perea, which terminated only upon the Master's entering Jerusalem for his final labors on earth. Throughout this period, the headquarters of Jesus and the 12 apostles was maintained here at the Pella camp. It was no longer necessary for Jesus to go abroad to teach the people. They now came to him in increasing numbers each week and from all parts, not only from Palestine, but from the whole Roman world and from the Near East. Although the Master participated with the 70 in the tour of Perea, he spent much of his time at the Pella camp, teaching the multitude and instructing the 12. Throughout this 3 months' period, at least 10 of the apostles remained with Jesus. The women's corps also prepared to go out, 2 and 2, with the 70 to labor in the larger cities of Perea. This original group of 12 women had recently trained a larger corps of 50 women in the work of home visitation and in the art of ministering to the sick and the afflicted. Perpetua, Simon Peter's wife, became a member of this new division of the Women's Corps and was entrusted with the leadership of the enlarged women's work under Abner. After Pentecost, she remained with her illustrious husband, accompanying him on all of his missionary tours. And on the day Peter was crucified in Rome, she was fed to the wild beasts in the arena. This new women's corps also had as members the wives of Philip and Matthew and the mother of James and John. The work of the kingdom now prepared to enter upon its terminal phase under the personal leadership of Jesus. And this present phase was one of spiritual depth in contrast with the miracle-minded and wonder-seeking multitudes who followed after the Master during the former days of popularity in Galilee. However, there were still any number of his followers who were material-minded and who failed to grasp the truth that the kingdom of heaven is the spiritual brotherhood of man, founded on the eternal fact of the universal fatherhood of God.
Paper 164. At the Feast of Dedication. As the camp at Pella was being established, Jesus, taking with him Nathanael and Thomas, secretly went up to Jerusalem to attend the Feast of the Dedication. Not until they passed over the Jordan at the Bethany ford did the two apostles become aware that their Master was going on to Jerusalem. When they perceived that he really intended to be present at the Feast of Dedication, they remonstrated with him most earnestly, and using every sort of argument they sought to dissuade him. But their efforts were of no avail. Jesus was determined to visit Jerusalem. To all their entreaties and to all their warnings emphasizing the folly and danger of placing himself in the hands of the Sanhedrin, he would reply only, "I would give these teachers in Israel another opportunity to see the light before my hour comes." On they went toward Jerusalem, the two apostles continuing to express their feelings of fear and to voice their doubts about the wisdom of such an apparently presumptuous undertaking. They reached Jericho about 4:30 and prepared to lodge there for the night. 1. Story of the Good Samaritan. That evening a considerable company gathered about Jesus and the two apostles to ask questions, many of which the apostles answered, while others the Master discussed. In the course of the evening a certain lawyer, seeking to entangle Jesus in a compromising disputation, said, "Teacher, I would like to ask you just what I should do to inherit eternal life." Jesus answered, "What is written in the law and the prophets? How do you read the Scriptures?" The lawyer, knowing the teachings of both Jesus and the Pharisees, answered, "To love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself." Then said Jesus, "You have answered right. This, if you really do, will lead to life everlasting." But the lawyer was not wholly sincere in asking this question, and desiring to justify himself while also hoping to embarrass Jesus, he ventured to ask still another question. Drawing a little closer to the Master, he said, "But teacher, I should like you to tell me just who is my neighbor." The lawyer asked this question hoping to entrap Jesus into making some statement that would contravene the Jewish law, which defined one's neighbor as the children of one's people. The Jews looked upon all others as Gentile dogs. This lawyer was somewhat familiar with Jesus' teachings, and therefore well knew that the Master thought differently. Thus he hoped to lead him into saying something which could be construed as an attack upon the sacred law. But Jesus discerned the lawyer's motive, and instead of falling into the trap, he proceeded to tell his hearers a story which would be fully appreciated by any Jericho audience. Said Jesus, "A certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell into the hands of cruel brigands, who robbed him, stripped him, and beat him, and departing, left him half dead. Very soon, by chance, a certain priest was going down that way, and when he came upon the wounded man, seeing his sorry plight, he passed by on the other side of the road. And in like manner a Levite also, when he came along and saw the man, passed by on the other side. Now about this time a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed down to Jericho, came across this wounded man. And when he saw how he had been robbed and beaten, he was moved with compassion, and going over to him, he bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and setting the man upon his own beast, brought him here to the inn and took care of him. And on the morrow he took out some money, and giving it to the host, said, "Take good care of my friend, and if the expense is more, when I come back again I will repay you." Now let me ask you, which of these three turned out to be the neighbor of him who fell among the robbers? And when the lawyer perceived that he had fallen into his own snare, he answered, "He who showed mercy on him." And Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." The lawyer answered, "He who showed mercy, that he might refrain from even speaking that odious word Samaritan." The lawyer was forced to give the very answer to the question, "Who is my neighbor?" which Jesus wished given, and which, if Jesus had so stated, would have directly involved him in the charge of heresy. Jesus not only confounded the dishonest lawyer, but he told his hearers a story which was at the same time a beautiful admonition to all his followers and a stunning rebuke to all Jews regarding their attitude toward the Samaritans. And this story has continued to promote brotherly love among all who have subsequently believed the gospel of Jesus. 2. At Jerusalem. Jesus had attended the Feast of Tabernacles that he might proclaim the gospel to the pilgrims from all parts of the empire. He now went up to the Feast of the Dedication for just one purpose: to give the Sanhedrin and the Jewish leaders another chance to see the light. The principal event of these few days in Jerusalem occurred on Friday night at the home of Nicodemus. Here were gathered together some 25 Jewish leaders who believed Jesus' teaching. Among this group were 14 men who were then, or had recently been, members of the Sanhedrin. This meeting was attended by Eber, Matadormus, and Joseph of Arimathea. On this occasion Jesus' hearers were all learned men, and both they and his 2 apostles were amazed at the breadth and depth of the remarks which the Master made to this distinguished group. Not since the times when he had taught in Alexandria, Rome, and in the islands of the Mediterranean had he exhibited such learning and shown such a grasp of the affairs of men, both secular and religious. When this little meeting broke up, all went away mystified by the Master's personality, charmed by his gracious manner, and in love with the man. They had sought to advise Jesus concerning his desire to win the remaining members of the Sanhedrin. The Master listened attentively but silently to all their proposals. He well knew none of their plans would work. He surmised that the majority of the Jewish leaders never would accept the gospel of the kingdom. Nevertheless, he gave them all this one more chance to choose. But when he went forth that night with Nathanael and Thomas to lodge on the Mount of Olives, he had not yet decided upon the method he would pursue in bringing his work once more to the notice of the Sanhedrin. That night Nathanael and Thomas slept little. They were too much amazed by what they had heard at Nicodemus's house. They thought much over the final remark of Jesus regarding the offer of the former and present members of the Sanhedrin to go with him before the 70. The Master said, "No, my brethren, it would be to no purpose. You would multiply the wrath to be visited upon your own heads, but you would not in the least mitigate the hatred which they bear me. Go, each of you, about the Father's business as the Spirit leads you, while I once more bring the kingdom to their notice in the manner which my Father may direct." 3. Healing the blind beggar. The next morning the 3 went over to Martha's home at Bethany for breakfast, and then went immediately into Jerusalem. This Sabbath morning, as Jesus and his 2 apostles drew near the temple, they encountered a well-known beggar, a man who had been born blind, sitting at his usual place. Although these mendicants did not solicit or receive alms on the Sabbath day, they were permitted thus to sit in their usual places. Jesus paused and looked upon the beggar. As he gazed upon this man who had been born blind, The idea came into his mind as to how he would once more bring his mission on earth to the notice of the Sanhedrin and the other Jewish leaders and religious teachers. As the Master stood there before the blind man, engrossed in deep thought, Nathanael, pondering the possible cause of this man's blindness, asked, "Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind?" The rabbis taught that all such cases of blindness from birth were caused by sin. Not only were children conceived and born in sin, but a child could be born blind as a punishment for some specific sin committed by its father. They even taught that a child itself might sin before it was born into the world. They also taught that such defects could be caused by some sin or other indulgence of the mother while carrying the child. There was throughout all these regions a lingering belief in reincarnation. The older Jewish teachers, together with Plato, Philo, and many of the Essenes, tolerated the theory that men may reap in one incarnation what they have sown in a previous existence. Thus, in one life they were believed to be expiating the sins committed in preceding lives. The Master found it difficult to make men believe that their souls had not had previous existences. However inconsistent as it seems, while such blindness was supposed to be the result of sin, the Jews held that it was meritorious in a high degree to give alms to these blind beggars. It was the custom of these blind men constantly to chant to passers-by, "O tender-hearted, gain merit by assisting the blind." Jesus entered into the discussion of this case with Nathanael and Thomas not only because he had already decided to use this blind man as the means of that day bringing his mission once more prominently to the notice of the Jewish leaders, but also because he always encouraged his apostles to seek for the true causes of all phenomena, natural or spiritual. He had often warned them to avoid the common tendency to assign spiritual causes to commonplace physical events. Jesus decided to use this beggar in his plans for that day's work, but before doing anything for the blind man, Josiah by name, he proceeded to answer Nathanael's question. Said the Master, "Neither did this man sin, nor his parents, that the works of God might be manifest in him. This blindness has come upon him in the natural course of events, but we must now do the works of him who sent me while it is still day. For the night will certainly come when it will be impossible to do the work we are about to perform. When I am in the world, I am the light of the world, but in only a little while I will not be with you." When Jesus had spoken, he said to Nathanael and Thomas, "Let us create the sight of this blind man on this Sabbath day, that the scribes and Pharisees may have the full occasion which they seek for accusing the Son of Man." Then, stooping over, he spat on the ground and mixed the clay with the spittle. And speaking of all this so that the blind man could hear, he went up to Josiah and put the clay over his sightless eyes, saying, "Go, my son, wash away this clay in the pool of Siloam, and immediately you shall receive your sight." And when Josiah had so washed in the pool of Siloam, he returned to his friends and family, seeing. Having always been a beggar, he knew nothing else. So when the first excitement of the creation of his sight had passed, he returned to his usual place of alms-seeking. His friends, neighbors, and all who had known him aforetime, when they observed that he could see, all said, "Is this not Josiah the blind beggar?" Some said it was he, while others said, "No, it is one like him, but this man can see." But when they asked the man himself, he answered, "I am he." When they began to inquire of him how he was able to see, he answered them, "A man called Jesus came by this way, and when talking about me with his friends, he made clay with spittle, anointed my eyes, and directed that I should go and wash in the pool of Siloam. I did what this man told me, and immediately I received my sight. And that is only a few hours ago. I do not yet know the meaning of much that I see." And when the people who began to gather about him asked where they could find the strange man who had healed him, Josiah could answer only that he did not know. This is one of the strangest of all the Master's miracles. This man did not ask for healing. He did not know that the Jesus who had directed him to wash at Siloam, and who had promised him vision, was the prophet of Galilee who had preached in Jerusalem during the Feast of Tabernacles. This man had little faith that he would receive his sight. But the people of that day had great faith in the efficacy of the spittle of a great or holy man. And from Jesus' conversation with Nathanael and Thomas, Josiah had concluded that his would-be benefactor was a great man, a learned teacher, or a holy prophet. Accordingly, he did as Jesus directed him. Jesus made use of the clay and the spittle and directed him to wash in the symbolic pool of Siloam for 3 reasons. 1. This was not a miracle response to the individual's faith. This was a wonder which Jesus chose to perform for a purpose of his own, but which he so arranged that this man might derive lasting benefit therefrom. 2. As the blind man had not asked for healing, and since the faith he had was slight, these material acts were suggested for the purpose of encouraging him. He did believe in the superstition of the efficacy of spittle, and he knew the pool of Siloam was a semi-sacred place. But he would hardly have gone there had it not been necessary to wash away the clay of his anointing. There was just enough ceremony about the transaction to induce him to act. 3. But Jesus had a third reason for resorting to these material means in connection with this unique transaction. This was a miracle wrought purely in obedience to his own choosing, and thereby he desired to teach his followers of that day and all subsequent ages to refrain from despising or neglecting material means in the healing of the sick. He wanted to teach them that they must cease to regard miracles as the only method of curing human diseases. Jesus gave this man his sight by miraculous working, on this Sabbath morning and in Jerusalem near the temple, for the prime purpose of making this act an open challenge to the Sanhedrin and all the Jewish teachers and religious leaders. This was his way of proclaiming an open break with the Pharisees. He was always positive in everything he did, and it was for the purpose of bringing these matters before the Sanhedrin that Jesus brought his 2 apostles to this man early in the afternoon of this Sabbath day and deliberately provoked those discussions which compelled the Pharisees to take notice of the miracle. 4. Josiah before the Sanhedrin. By mid-afternoon the healing of Josiah had raised such a discussion around the temple that the leaders of the Sanhedrin decided to convene the council in its usual temple meeting place, and they did this in violation of a standing rule which forbade the meeting of the Sanhedrin on the Sabbath day. Jesus knew that Sabbath breaking would be one of the chief charges to be brought against him when the final test came, and he desired to be brought before the Sanhedrin for adjudication of the charge of having healed a blind man on the Sabbath day, when the very session of the high Jewish court sitting in judgment on him for this act of mercy would be deliberating on these matters on the Sabbath day and in direct violation of their own self-imposed laws. But they did not call Jesus before them. They feared to. Instead they sent forthwith for Josiah. After some preliminary questioning, the spokesman for the Sanhedrin, about 50 members being present, directed Josiah to tell them what had happened to him. Since his healing that morning, Josiah had learned from Thomas, Nathanael, and others that the Pharisees were angry about his healing on the Sabbath, and that they were likely to make trouble for all concerned. But Josiah did not yet perceive that Jesus was he who was called the deliverer. So when the Pharisees questioned him, he said, "This man came along, put clay upon my eyes, told me to go wash in Siloam, and I do now see." One of the older Pharisees, after making a lengthy speech, said, "This man cannot be from God, because you can see that he does not observe the Sabbath. He violates the law, first in making the clay, then in sending this beggar to wash in Siloam on the Sabbath day. Such a man cannot be a teacher sent from God." Then one of the younger men who secretly believed in Jesus said, "If this man is not sent by God, how can he do these things? We know that one who is a common sinner cannot perform such miracles. We all know this beggar, and that he was born blind. Now he sees. Will you still say that this prophet does all these wonders by the power of the prince of devils? And for every Pharisee who dared to accuse and denounce Jesus, one would arise to ask entangling and embarrassing questions, so that a serious division arose among them. The presiding officer saw whither they were drifting, and in order to allay the discussion, he prepared further to question the man himself. Turning to Josiah, he said, "What do you have to say about this man, this Jesus, whom you claim opened your eyes?" And Josiah answered, "I think he is a prophet." The leaders were greatly troubled, and knowing not what else to do, decided to send for Josiah's parents to learn whether he had actually been born blind. They were loath to believe that the beggar had been healed. It was well known about Jerusalem, not only that Jesus was denied entrance into all synagogues, but that all who believed in his teaching were likewise cast out of the synagogue, excommunicated from the congregation of Israel. And this meant denial of all rights and privileges of every sort throughout all Jewry, except the right to buy the necessities of life. When therefore Josiah's parents, poor and fear-burdened souls, appeared before the august Sanhedrin, they were afraid to speak freely. Said the spokesman of the court, "Is this your son? And do we understand aright that he was born blind? If this is true, how is it that he can now see?" And then Josiah's father, seconded by his mother, answered, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But how it is that he is come to see, or who it was that opened his eyes, we know not. Ask him. He is of age, let him speak for himself." They now called Josiah up before them a second time. They were not getting along well with their scheme of holding a formal trial, and some were beginning to feel strange about doing this on the Sabbath. Accordingly, when they recalled Josiah, they attempted to ensnare him by a different mode of attack. The officer of the court spoke to the former blind man, saying, "Why do you not give God the glory for this? Why do you not tell us the whole truth about what happened? We all know that this man is a sinner. Why do you refuse to discern the truth? You know that both you and this man stand convicted of Sabbath breaking. Will you not atone for your sin by acknowledging God as your healer, if you still claim that your eyes have this day been opened?" But Josiah was neither dumb nor lacking in humor. So he replied to the officer of the court, "Whether this man is a sinner, I know not. But one thing I do know, that whereas I was blind, now I see." And since they could not entrap Josiah, they sought further to question him, asking, "Just how did he open your eyes? What did he actually do to you? What did he say to you? Did he ask you to believe in him?" Josiah replied somewhat impatiently, "I have told you exactly how it all happened, and if you did not believe my testimony, why would you hear it again? Would you by any chance also become his disciples?" When Josiah had thus spoken, the Sanhedrin broke up in confusion, almost violence, for the leaders rushed upon Josiah, angrily exclaiming, "You may talk about being this man's disciple, but we are disciples of Moses, and we are the teachers of the laws of God. We know that God spoke through Moses, but as for this man Jesus, we know not whence he is." Then Josiah, standing upon a stool, shouted abroad to all who could hear, saying, "Hearken, you who claim to be the teachers of all Israel, while I declare to you that herein is a great marvel, since you confess that you know not whence this man is, and yet you know of a certainty, from the testimony which you have heard, that he opened my eyes. We all know that God does not perform such works for the ungodly, that God would do such a thing only at the request of a true worshiper, for one who is holy and righteous. You know that not since the beginning of the world have you ever heard of the opening of the eyes of one who was born blind. Look, then, all of you upon me, and realize what has been done this day in Jerusalem. I tell you, if this man were not from God, he could not do this. And as the Sanhedrists departed in anger and confusion, they shouted to him, "You were altogether born in sin, and do you now presume to teach us?" Maybe you were not really born blind, and even if your eyes were opened on the Sabbath day, this was done by the power of the prince of devils. And they went at once to the synagogue to cast out Josiah. Josiah entered this trial with meager ideas about Jesus and the nature of his healing. Most of the daring testimony which he so cleverly and courageously bore before this supreme tribunal of all Israel developed in his mind as the trial proceeded along such unfair and unjust lines. 5. Teaching in Solomon's Porch. All of the time this Sabbath-breaking session of the Sanhedrin was in progress in one of the temple chambers, Jesus was walking about near at hand, teaching the people in Solomon's Porch, hoping that he would be summoned before the Sanhedrin, where he could tell them the good news of the liberty and joy of divine sonship in the kingdom of God. But they were afraid to send for him. They were always disconcerted by these sudden and public appearances of Jesus in Jerusalem. The very occasion they had so ardently sought, Jesus now gave them. But they feared to bring him before the Sanhedrin even as a witness, and even more, they feared to arrest him. This was midwinter in Jerusalem, and the people sought the partial shelter of Solomon's Porch. And as Jesus lingered, the crowds asked him many questions, and he taught them for more than 2 hours. Some of the Jewish teachers sought to entrap him by publicly asking him, "How long will you hold us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, why do you not plainly tell us?" Said Jesus, "I have told you about myself and my Father many times, but you will not believe me. Can you not see that the works I do in my Father's name bear witness for me? But many of you believe not, because you belong not to my fold. The teacher of truth attracts only those who hunger for the truth, and who thirst for righteousness. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And to all who follow my teaching I give eternal life. They shall never perish, and no one shall snatch them out of my hand. My Father, who has given me these children, is greater than all, so that no one is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. The Father and I are one." Some of the unbelieving Jews rushed over to where they were still building the temple to pick up stones to cast at Jesus, but the believers restrained them. Jesus continued his teaching. "Many loving works have I shown you from the Father, so that now would I inquire, for which one of these good works do you think to stone me?" And then answered one of the Pharisees, "For no good work would we stone you, but for blasphemy, inasmuch as you, being a man, dare to make yourself equal with God." And Jesus answered, "You charge the Son of Man with blasphemy, because you refused to believe me when I declared to you that I was sent by God. If I do not the works of God, believe me not. But if I do the works of God, even though you believe not in me, I should think you would believe the works. But that you may be certain of what I proclaim, let me again assert that the Father is in me, and I in the Father, and that as the Father dwells in me, so will I dwell in every one who believes this gospel." And when the people heard these words, many of them rushed out to lay hands upon the stones to cast at him, but he passed out through the temple precincts. And meeting Nathanael and Thomas, who had been in attendance upon the session of the Sanhedrin, he waited with them near the temple until Josiah came from the council chamber. Jesus and the 2 apostles did not go in search of Josiah at his home until they heard he had been cast out of the synagogue. When they came to his house, Thomas called him out in the yard, and Jesus, speaking to him, said, "Josiah, do you believe in the Son of God?" And Josiah answered, "Tell me who he is, that I may believe in him." And Jesus said, "You have both seen and heard him, and it is he who now speaks to you." And Josiah said, "Lord, I believe," and falling down he worshipped. When Josiah learned that he had been cast out of the synagogue, he was at first greatly downcast. But he was much encouraged when Jesus directed that he should immediately prepare to go with them to the camp at Pella. This simple-minded man of Jerusalem had indeed been cast out of a Jewish synagogue. But behold the Creator of a universe leading him forth to become associated with the spiritual nobility of that day and generation. And now Jesus left Jerusalem, not again to return until near the time when he prepared to leave this world. With the 2 apostles and Josiah, the Master went back to Pella. And Josiah proved to be one of the recipients of the Master's miraculous ministry who turned out fruitfully, for he became a lifelong preacher of the gospel of the kingdom.
Paper 165. The Perean Mission begins. On Tuesday, January 3, A.D. 30, Abner, the former chief of the 12 apostles of John the Baptist, a Nazarite, and one-time head of the Nazarite school at En-Gedi, now chief of the 70 messengers of the kingdom, called his associates together and gave them final instructions before sending them on a mission to all of the cities and villages of Perea. This Perean mission continued for almost 3 months and was the last ministry of the Master. From these labors, Jesus went directly to Jerusalem to pass through his final experiences in the flesh. The 70, supplemented by the periodic labors of Jesus and the 12 apostles, worked in the following cities and towns, and some 50 additional villages: Zaphon, Gadara, Makad, Arbela, Ramoth, Edrei, Basora, Caspin, Mizpah, Gerasa, Ragaba, Succoth, Amathus, Adam, Penuel, Capitolius, Dion, Hatita, Gada, Philadelphia, Jogbeha, Gilead, Beth Nimrah, Tyrus, Eliela, Livius, Heshbon, Caleroa, Beth Peor, Shittim, Sibma, Medeba, Beth Meon, Areopolis, and Aroer. Throughout this tour of Perea, the Women's Corps, now numbering 62, took over most of the work of ministration to the sick. This was the final period of the development of the higher spiritual aspects of the gospel of the kingdom, and there was, accordingly, an absence of miracle working. No other part of Palestine was so thoroughly worked by the apostles and disciples of Jesus, and in no other region did the better classes of citizens so generally accept the Master's teaching. Perea at this time was about equally Gentile and Jewish, the Jews having been generally removed from these regions during the times of Judas Maccabee. Perea was the most beautiful and picturesque province of all Palestine. It was generally referred to by the Jews as the land beyond the Jordan. Throughout this period, Jesus divided his time between the camp at Pella and trips with the 12 to assist the 70 in the various cities where they taught and preached. Under Abner's instructions, the 70 baptized all believers, although Jesus had not so charged them. 1. At the Pella camp. By the middle of January, more than 1,200 persons were gathered together at Pella, and Jesus taught this multitude at least once each day when he was in residence at the camp, usually speaking at 9 o'clock in the morning if not prevented by rain. Peter and the other apostles taught each afternoon. The evenings Jesus reserved for the usual sessions of questions and answers with the 12 and other advanced disciples. The evening groups averaged about 50. By the middle of March, the time when Jesus began his journey toward Jerusalem, over 4,000 persons composed the large audience which heard Jesus or Peter preach each morning. The Master chose to terminate his work on earth when the interest in his message had reached a high point, the highest point attained under this second or non-miraculous phase of the progress of the kingdom. While 3/4 of the multitude were truth-seekers, there were also present a large number of Pharisees from Jerusalem and elsewhere, together with many doubters and cavillers. Jesus and the 12 apostles devoted much of their time to the multitude assembled at the Pella camp. The 12 paid little or no attention to the field work, only going out with Jesus to visit Abner's associates from time to time. Abner was very familiar with the Perean district, since this was the field in which his former master, John the Baptist, had done most of his work. After beginning the Perean mission, Abner and the 70 never returned to the Pella camp. 2. Sermon on the Good Shepherd. A company of over 300 Jerusalemites, Pharisees, and others followed Jesus north to Pella when he hastened away from the jurisdiction of the Jewish rulers at the ending of the Feast of the Dedication. And it was in the presence of these Jewish teachers and leaders, as well as in the hearing of the 12 apostles, that Jesus preached the sermon on the Good Shepherd. After half an hour of informal discussion, speaking to a group of about 100, Jesus said, "On this night I have much to tell you, and since many of you are my disciples and some of you my bitter enemies, I will present my teaching in a parable, so that you may each take for yourself that which finds a reception in your heart. Tonight, here before me are men who would be willing to die for me and for this gospel of the kingdom, and some of them will so offer themselves in the years to come. And here also are some of you, slaves of tradition, who have followed me down from Jerusalem, and who, with your darkened and deluded leaders, seek to kill the Son of Man. The life which I now live in the flesh shall judge both of you, the true shepherds and the false shepherds. If the false shepherd were blind, he would have no sin. But you claim that you see. You profess to be teachers in Israel. Therefore does your sin remain upon you. The true shepherd gathers his flock into the fold for the night in times of danger. And when the morning has come, he enters into the fold by the door, and when he calls, the sheep know his voice. Every shepherd who gains entrance to the sheepfold by any other means than by the door is a thief and a robber. The true shepherd enters the fold after the porter has opened the door for him, and his sheep, knowing his voice, come out at his word. And when they that are his are thus brought forth, the true shepherd goes before them. He leads the way, and the sheep follow him. His sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger. They will flee from the stranger because they know not his voice. This multitude which is gathered about us here are like sheep without a shepherd. But when we speak to them, they know the shepherd's voice, and they follow after us. At least those who hunger for truth and thirst for righteousness do. Some of you are not of my fold. You know not my voice, and you do not follow me. And because you are false shepherds, the sheep know not your voice and will not follow you." And when Jesus had spoken this parable, no one asked him a question. After a time he began again to speak, and went on to discuss the parable. "You who would be the under-shepherds of my Father's flocks must not only be worthy leaders, but you must also feed the flock with good food. You are not true shepherds unless you lead your flocks into green pastures and beside still waters. And now, lest some of you too easily comprehend this parable, I will declare that I am both the door to the Father's sheepfold, and at the same time the true shepherd of my Father's flocks. Every shepherd who seeks to enter the fold without me shall fail, and the sheep will not hear his voice. I, with those who minister with me, am the door. Every soul who enters upon the eternal way by the means I have created and ordained shall be saved and will be able to go on to the attainment of the eternal pastures of paradise. But I also am the true shepherd, who is willing even to lay down his life for the sheep. The thief breaks into the fold only to steal and to kill and to destroy. But I have come that you all may have life, and have it more abundantly. He who is a hireling, when danger arises, will flee and allow the sheep to be scattered and destroyed. But the true shepherd will not flee when the wolf comes. He will protect his flock, and if necessary, lay down his life for his sheep. Verily, verily, I say to you, friends and enemies, I am the true shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. I will not flee in the face of danger. I will finish this service of the completion of my Father's will, and I will not forsake the flock which the Father has entrusted to my keeping. But I have many other sheep not of this fold, and these words are true not only of this world. These other sheep also hear and know my voice. And I have promised the Father that they shall all be brought into one fold, one brotherhood of the sons of God. And then shall you all know the voice of one shepherd, the true shepherd, and shall all acknowledge the fatherhood of God. And so shall you know why the Father loves me, and has put all of his flocks in this domain in my hands for keeping. It is because the Father knows that I will not falter in the safeguarding of the sheepfold, that I will not desert my sheep, and that if it shall be required, I will not hesitate to lay down my life in the service of his manifold flocks. But mind you, if I lay down my life, I will take it up again. No man nor any other creature can take away my life. I have the right and the power to lay down my life, and I have the same power and right to take it up again. You cannot understand this, but I received such authority from my Father even before this world was. When they heard these words, his apostles were confused, his disciples were amazed, while the Pharisees from Jerusalem and around about went out into the night, saying, "He is either mad or has a devil." But even some of the Jerusalem teachers said, "He speaks like one having authority. Besides, who ever saw one having a devil open the eyes of a man born blind, and do all of the wonderful things which this man has done?" On the morrow, about half of these Jewish teachers professed belief in Jesus, and the other half, in dismay, returned to Jerusalem and their homes. 3. Sabbath Sermon at Pella. By the end of January, the Sabbath afternoon multitudes numbered almost 3,000. On Saturday, January 28, Jesus preached the memorable sermon on trust and spiritual preparedness. After preliminary remarks by Simon Peter, the Master said, "What I have many times said to my apostles and to my disciples, I now declare to this multitude, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy, born of prejudice and nurtured in traditional bondage, albeit many of these Pharisees are honest of heart, and some of them abide here as my disciples. Presently all of you shall understand my teaching, for there is nothing now covered that shall not be revealed. That which is now hid from you shall all be made known when the Son of Man has completed his mission on earth and in the flesh. Soon, very soon, will the things which our enemies now plan in secrecy and in darkness be brought out into the light and be proclaimed from the housetops. But I say to you, my friends, when they seek to destroy the Son of Man, be not afraid of them. Fear not those who, although they may be able to kill the body, after that have no more power over you. I admonish you to fear none, in heaven or on earth, but to rejoice in the knowledge of him who has power to deliver you from all unrighteousness, and to present you blameless before the judgment seat of a universe. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? And yet when these birds flit about in quest of their sustenance, not one of them exists without the knowledge of the Father, the source of all life. To the seraphic guardians the very hairs of your head are numbered. And if all of this is true, why should you live in fear of the many trifles which come up in your daily lives? I say to you, fear not. You are of much more value than many sparrows. All of you who have had the courage to confess faith in my gospel before men, I will presently acknowledge before the angels of heaven. But he who shall knowingly deny the truth of my teachings before men shall be denied by his guardian of destiny even before the angels of heaven. Say what you will about the Son of Man, and it shall be forgiven you. But he who presumes to blaspheme against God shall hardly find forgiveness. When men go so far as knowingly to ascribe the doings of God to the forces of evil, such deliberate rebels will hardly seek forgiveness for their sins. And when our enemies bring you before the rulers of the synagogues and before other high authorities, be not concerned about what you should say, and be not anxious as to how you should answer their questions, for the Spirit that dwells within you shall certainly teach you in that very hour what you should say in honor of the gospel of the kingdom. How long will you tarry in the valley of decision? Why do you halt between 2 opinions? Why should Jew or Gentile hesitate to accept the good news that he is a son of the eternal God? How long will it take us to persuade you to enter joyfully into your spiritual inheritance? I came into this world to reveal the Father to you and to lead you to the Father. The first I have done, but the last I may not do without your consent. The Father never compels any man to enter the kingdom. The invitation ever has been, and always will be, whosoever will, let him come, and freely partake of the water of life. When Jesus had finished speaking, many went forth to be baptized by the apostles in the Jordan, while he listened to the questions of those who remained. 4. Dividing the inheritance. As the apostles baptized believers, the Master talked with those who tarried, and a certain young man said to him, Master, my father died, leaving much property to me and my brother, but my brother refuses to give me that which is my own. Will you then bid my brother divide this inheritance with me? Jesus was mildly indignant that this material-minded youth should bring up for discussion such a question of business, but he proceeded to use the occasion for the impartation of further instruction. Said Jesus, Man, who made me a divider over you? Where did you get the idea that I give attention to the material affairs of this world? And then turning to all who were about him, he said, Take heed, and keep yourselves free from covetousness. A man's life consists not in the abundance of the things which he may possess. Happiness comes not from the power of wealth, and joy springs not from riches. Wealth in itself is not a curse, but the love of riches many times leads to such devotion to the things of this world that the soul becomes blinded to the beautiful attractions of the spiritual realities of the kingdom of God on earth and to the joys of eternal life in heaven. Let me tell you a story of a certain rich man whose ground brought forth plentifully. And when he had become very rich, he began to reason with himself, saying, What shall I do with all my riches? I now have so much that I have no place to store my wealth. And when he had meditated on his problem, he said, This I will do. I will pull down my barns and build greater ones, and thus will I have abundant room in which to store my fruits and my goods. Then can I say to my soul, Soul, you have much wealth laid up for many years. Take now your ease, eat, drink, and be merry, for you are rich and increased in goods. But this rich man was also foolish. In providing for the material requirements of his mind and body, he had failed to lay up treasures in heaven for the satisfaction of the spirit and for the salvation of the soul. And even then he was not to enjoy the pleasure of consuming his hoarded wealth, for that very night was his soul required of him. That night there came the brigands, who broke into his house to kill him, and after they had plundered his barns, they burned that which remained. And for the property which escaped the robbers, his heirs fell to fighting among themselves. This man laid up treasures for himself on earth, but he was not rich toward God. Jesus thus dealt with the young man and his inheritance, because he knew that his trouble was covetousness. Even if this had not been the case, the Master would not have interfered, for he never meddled with the temporal affairs of even his apostles, much less his disciples. When Jesus had finished his story, another man rose up and asked him, Master, I know that your apostles have sold all their earthly possessions to follow you, and that they have all things in common, as do the Essenes. But would you have all of us who are your disciples do likewise? Is it a sin to possess honest wealth? And Jesus replied to this question, My friend, it is not a sin to have honorable wealth, but it is a sin if you convert the wealth of material possessions into treasures, which may absorb your interests and divert your affections from devotion to the spiritual pursuits of the kingdom. There is no sin in having honest possessions on earth, provided your treasure is in heaven. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. There is a great difference between wealth which leads to covetousness and selfishness, and that which is held and dispensed in the spirit of stewardship by those who have an abundance of this world's goods and who so bountifully contribute to the support of those who devote all their energies to the work of the kingdom. Many of you who are here and without money are fed and lodged in yonder tented city because liberal men and women of means have given funds to your host, David Zebedee, for such purposes, but never forget that after all wealth is unenduring. The love of riches all too often obscures and even destroys the spiritual vision. Fail not to recognize the danger of wealth's becoming not your servant, but your master. Jesus did not teach nor countenance improvidence, idleness, indifference to providing the physical necessities for one's family, or dependence upon alms. But he did teach that the material and temporal must be subordinated to the welfare of the soul and the progress of the spiritual nature in the kingdom of heaven. Then, as the people went down by the river to witness the baptizing, the first man came privately to Jesus about his inheritance, inasmuch as he thought Jesus had dealt harshly with him. And when the master had again heard him, he replied, "My son, why do you miss the opportunity to feed upon the bread of life on a day like this, in order to indulge your covetous disposition? Do you not know that the Jewish laws of inheritance will be justly administered if you will go with your complaint to the court of the synagogue? Can you not see that my work has to do with making sure that you know about your heavenly inheritance? Have you not read the scripture, 'There is he who waxes rich by his wariness and much pinching, and this is the portion of his reward,' whereas he says, 'I have found rest, and now shall be able to eat continually of my goods,' yet he knows not what time shall bring upon him, and also that he must leave all these things to others when he dies. Have you not read the commandment, 'You shall not covet'? And again, 'They have eaten and filled themselves and waxed fat, and then did they turn to other gods.' Have you read in the Psalms that the Lord abhors the covetous, and that the little a righteous man has is better than the riches of many wicked? If riches increase, set not your heart upon them. Have you read where Jeremiah said, 'Let not the rich man glory in his riches'? And Ezekiel spoke truth when he said, 'With their mouths they make a show of love, but their hearts are set upon their own selfish gain.' Jesus sent the young man away, saying to him, 'My son, what shall it profit you if you gain the whole world and lose your own soul?' To another standing nearby who asked Jesus how the wealthy would stand in the day of judgment, he replied, 'I have come to judge neither the rich nor the poor, but the lives men live will sit in judgment on all. Whatever else may concern the wealthy in the judgment, at least 3 questions must be answered by all who acquire great wealth. And these questions are, 1. How much wealth did you accumulate? 2. How did you get this wealth? 3. How did you use your wealth?" Then Jesus went into his tent to rest for a while before the evening meal. When the apostles had finished with the baptizing, they came also, and would have talked with him about wealth on earth and treasure in heaven, but he was asleep. 5. Talks to the apostles on wealth. That evening after supper, when Jesus and the 12 gathered together for their daily conference, Andrew asked, "Master, while we were baptizing the believers, you spoke many words to the lingering multitude which we did not hear. Would you be willing to repeat these words for our benefit?" And in response to Andrew's request, Jesus said, "Yes, Andrew, I will speak to you about these matters of wealth and self-support. But my words to you, the apostles, must be somewhat different from those spoken to the disciples and the multitude, since you have forsaken everything not only to follow me, but to be ordained as ambassadors of the kingdom. Already have you had several years' experience, and you know that the Father whose kingdom you proclaim will not forsake you. You have dedicated your lives to the ministry of the kingdom. Therefore be not anxious or worried about the things of the temporal life, what you shall eat, nor yet for your body what you shall wear. The welfare of the soul is more than food and drink. The progress in the Spirit is far above the need of raiment. When you are tempted to doubt the sureness of your bread, consider the ravens. They sow not, neither reap, they have no storehouses or barns, and yet the Father provides food for every one of them that seeks it. And of how much more value are you than many birds? Besides, all of your anxiety or fretting doubts can do nothing to supply your material needs. which of you, by anxiety, can add a handbreadth to your stature, or a day to your life? Since such matters are not in your hands, why do you give anxious thought to any of these problems? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. Yet I say to you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. If God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is cut down and cast into the fire, how much more shall he clothe you, the ambassadors of the heavenly kingdom? O you of little faith! When you wholeheartedly devote yourselves to the proclamation of the gospel of the kingdom, you should not be of doubtful minds concerning the support of yourselves, or the families you have forsaken. If you give your lives truly to the gospel, you shall live by the gospel. If you are only believing disciples, you must earn your own bread and contribute to the sustenance of all who teach and preach and heal. If you are anxious about your bread and water, wherein are you different from the nations of the world, who so diligently seek such necessities? Devote yourselves to your work, believing that both the Father and I know that you have need of all these things. Let me assure you once and for all that if you dedicate your lives to the work of the kingdom, all your real needs shall be supplied. Seek the greater thing, and the lesser will be found therein. Ask for the heavenly, and the earthly shall be included. The shadow is certain to follow the substance. You are only a small group, but if you have faith, if you will not stumble in fear, I declare that it is my Father's good pleasure to give you this kingdom. You have laid up your treasures where the purse waxes not old, where no thief can despoil, and where no moth can destroy. And as I told the people, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. But in the work which is just ahead of us, and in that which remains for you after I go to the Father, you will be grievously tried. You must all be on your watch against fear and doubts. Every one of you, gird up the loins of your minds, and let your lamps be kept burning. Keep yourselves like men who are watching for their master to return from the marriage feast, so that when he comes and knocks, you may quickly open to him. Such watchful servants are blessed by the master, who finds them faithful at such a great moment. Then will the master make his servants sit down, while he himself serves them. Verily, verily, I say to you, that a crisis is just ahead in your lives, and it behooves you to watch and be ready. You well understand that no man would suffer his house to be broken into if he knew what hour the thief was to come. Be you also on watch for yourselves, for in an hour that you least suspect, and in a manner you think not, shall the Son of Man depart. For some minutes the 12 sat in silence. Some of these warnings they had heard before, but not in the setting presented to them at this time. 6. Answer to Peter's question. As they sat thinking, Simon Peter asked, "Do you speak this parable to us, your apostles, or is it for all the disciples?" And Jesus answered, "In the time of testing, a man's soul is revealed. Trial discloses what really is in the heart. When the servant is tested and proved, then may the Lord of the house set such a servant over his household, and safely trust this faithful steward to see that his children are fed and nurtured. Likewise will I soon know who can be trusted with the welfare of my children, when I shall have returned to the Father. As the Lord of the household shall set the true and tried servant over the affairs of his family, so will I exalt those who endure the trials of this hour in the affairs of my kingdom. But if the servant is slothful, and begins to say in his heart, 'My master delays his coming,' and begins to mistreat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunken, then the Lord of that servant will come at a time when he looks not for him, and finding him unfaithful, will cast him out in disgrace. Therefore, you do well to prepare yourselves for that day when you will be visited suddenly and in an unexpected manner. Remember, much has been given to you. Therefore, will much be required of you. Fiery trials are drawing near you. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and I am on watch until this is accomplished. You preach peace on earth, but my mission will not bring peace in the material affairs of men, not for a time at least. Division can only be the result where 2 members of a family believe in me and 3 members reject this gospel. Friends, relatives, and loved ones are destined to be set against each other by the gospel you preach. True, each of these believers shall have great and lasting peace in his own heart. But peace on earth will not come until all are willing to believe and enter into their glorious inheritance of sonship with God. Nevertheless, go into all the world, proclaiming this gospel to all nations, to every man, woman, and child. And this was the end of a full and busy Sabbath day. On the morrow, Jesus and the 12 went into the cities of northern Perea to visit with the 70, who were working in these regions under Abner's supervision.